There it
Okay.
is.
Yeah, there it is. So sorry for those watching the recording. I kind of went through my intro, but here we're on. I tried to make the case that physical activity is important, particularly in the Black community here, and looking at ways to use physical activity in relation to if we can find any signatures towards dementia risk or cognitive impairment. So this is what we traditionally use with the accelerometer data. We go a little bit deeper into the accelerometer data, and I'm going to give this example. This is a 9-minute example. Someone's wearing it on the wrist, right? They're walking, they sit down, they stand up to walk again, and they sit back down. I think that's it. Yes. So then what do we have? We have all of the activity counts that are being collected during this behavior of movement. Okay, it's going up and down with the sitting and standing, and then we can add that up. That's kind of a measure of volume. We also like to say if it's active or not. We do threshold a bit. So if it reaches a high enough threshold, we would take that minute and say that's an active minute. That's labeled here in green. And you can see the first 3 minutes are active. The person sits down, then that minute gets labeled as sedentary, sedentary, active, sedentary. We can count those up, and that's way more interpretable. Now, with this, we can get a feature of patterning that we like to call fragmentation, meaning, is the activity occurring in one continuous bout or consecutive minutes of activity, or is it broken up? So that's essentially what we conceptualize as fragmentation. And here we can conceptualize activity fragmentation as the probability of becoming sedentary after being active, right? So that means the higher the activity fragmentation, the higher probability of transitioning into a sedentary state. We think that's bad for older adult health. For sedentary fragmentation, it's the opposite. It's the likelihood of transitioning to active state from a sedentary state, which is good. You want to break up being sedentary. So sedentary fragmentation, good. Activity fragmentation, bad. And I'll review that again when we get to it. There is, I think the smartwatch technology is growing, and this is, I think, a way to help. I think people are using a lot more, and these types of metrics can be deployed within this technology. I'm showing here that 1 in 5 Americans say they use smartwatch or fitness tracker. So the uptake is coming up, and particularly in Black and Hispanic populations that actually answered this question, it's actually higher. So there's this potential of not just, sending a research grade out device just for research, but actually using it as an intervention target or for a monitoring target as well. Oh, there is a question. I'm fine to stop if we want to right now. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Amal, thanks a lot for this background. I was just wondering in terms of the sedentary definition of a sedentary state. Is it like, should we be thinking about it as someone sitting and doing nothing? Or is it like the situation where I'm sitting, but like if you're a young parent, you have a baby in your hand, the baby is moving around, there's still some activity that's going on, but you're sitting. Is it like, how should we be thinking about that?
It cannot distinguish that. So that's a limitation of accelerometry. It does everything else really well, but does not get context. So right now we can't distinguish it, but we're hoping to with more of the raw data. But for right now, in this analysis, that type of stuff is not distinguishable. That's a good point, though.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I also want to convince you that physical activity is part of social justice as well. Okay. And the first point, many social determinants of health, such as income and education, are associated with opportunities to be either physically active or lack thereof. Okay. That's basically access to areas in which you can be physically active. Unequal environmental factors, such as redline displacement, all sorts of things play a role in physical activity engagement or lack thereof. Racism involves fear of brutality and violence that limits and even suppresses and prevents physical activity engagement. We saw on the news the tragedy of Ahmaud Arbery. just running, jogging for his health and gets murdered. I mean, that has huge implications. Then that's not even an outlier. And despite all of that, there is a lack of community-informed physical activity research and interventions among minority communities. And that's really what compelled me to put my grant in for the RCMAR, particularly here in Baltimore. When I was looking, I didn't see any research on this area, and to start it and to begin it. Okay, so the specific aims for this particular project was to compare differences in physical activity patterns. This is looking at physical activity as everyday movement and seeing if they're different between those older adult Black participants with mild cognitive impairment or normal cognition. And what I hypothesize is those with living with MCI have lower amounts of everyday movement, which is physical activity in this case, higher activity fragmentation, which is basically more broken up activity when they're active, not continuous. And then there's delayed and diminished diurnal activity patterning when compared to counterparts with normal cognition. So that's the main hypothesis, and that's using our research grade activity actigraph monitor. Now, I showed you the slide with the smartwatches. I think we can translate that type of research into consumer grade watches, in which people can just have their watches and they can tap into this data on their own. So aim 2 was to validate the accelerometer data within a commercial grade wearable. Here, we're testing Apple with a research grade physical activity monitor. That's actigraph, which is widely used across many different studies, and hypothesized that the raw and processed data is highly correlated here. I say over 90%. It's kind of arbitrary, but I thought that was pretty high with the actigraph monitor. And importantly, there is this exploratory analysis to see if deploying either is feasible to capture physical activity in Black older adults with MCI. I think a lot of people think MCI, people might not adhere to the study procedures and things like that. And this is one way of testing that. Okay. So the recruitment, we recruited through the Johns Hopkins ADRC. That's led by Dr. Marilyn Albert. She was so helpful in doing this. And essentially, they follow a cohort of older adults through their memory and aging study. And there's a good portion of them that agreed to be contacted for research. So they provided us potential participants for our study. So for this pilot, the additional exclusion was that they were Black and or self-identify as African-American, 60 years and older. The 3 bullets here basically came about because COVID hit and we had to change from an in-person visit to remote visit and deploy this whole study remotely. So these 3 are basically, can we have a Zoom visit with you to talk through the study procedures? The exclusion are basically the top 3 are around confounders that may look like MCI but are not. And then the last bullet is tremors that may artifactually increase physical activity, but it's not actually the physical activity that we're trying to measure. Okay, recruitment timeline. This thing was going so well. So basically, what this is showing is the dotted blue line is our target. We were targeting 40 participants at the time, 65 years and older, 50% with either mild MCI or mild AD, 50% women over a 12-month period. COVID hit. RCMAR directors were very generous with this. They allowed me to delay, turn to remote. We started remote, and then still it was very hard, I think, for all studies to start recruiting. So we ended up with 25 participants here. We went a little bit younger here for 60 years and older. The targets were a little bit off. 64% with MCR or mild AD. Actually, there's one person with mild AD recruited, and then 84% women, and recruited over a span around 18 months. But still, we got really good data. Just to give you an idea, let me just make sure what the time is. Oh my gosh, it's almost 1:30. Just to give you an idea of the study flow, it's essentially we would call potential participants, have an oral screen, consent and screening. From there, we would send out the devices and schedule a Zoom visit. So then the day after that we knew that the devices would be delivered, they would have all the equipment ready. We would talk with them through the study procedures, and then off they go. Basically, it's a 10-day collection from that Zoom visit of wearing 2 watches on the non-dominant wrist, and then every day filling out a bedtime and study log. And then they had some questionnaires to fill out. And from that, they would send all of that back. Then we'd have a follow-up of giving it back a feedback form in which it had their exact physical activity patterns averaged for all over the days, and information of you were most active at this time, and you were active for this amount of period while you were awake, things of that nature. Okay. So the 2 watches, they were wearing 2 watches on one wrist. It's very awkward. I really appreciate that they consented to this. So they're wearing here closer to my hand. This is my hand, is the Actigraph watch, and then further away from the wrist is the Apple Watch. They would wear that for 10 days, and then every day they would have to basically deal with the Apple Watch. And that was turning on this sensor, this third-party sensor app to collect physical activity, tell us when they wake up, tell us when they go to bed, and then charge the Apple Watch every day. This is not research grade, in which the Actigraph can last for over 7 days. The Apple Watch cannot, because it's not made for that specific purpose. So this is the app that we use. Michelle Carlson and her group attuned us to this app, and we're really appreciative of that. And there was a lot of tinkering that people had to do to ensure that the app was collecting the data long term. And let me just kind of I have a little bit of overview on it. So Actigraph, basically, we initialize it. We instruct them how to wear it. They would just put it on, and they don't have to take it off unless they engage in some water-based activity for more than 30 minutes. It was very easy. You just leave it on, right? Apple Watch, though, we had the Zoom visit specifically so they could practice all the procedures in turning on the app to collect physical activity. And every morning, there were 2 steps. You had to turn off this default setting that limited collection to an hour, so it can go more than an hour. And then after that, turn it on to actually collect. Now, we froze the version of the app, so we just kept it like that because I think the app was continually updated. I think Michelle and your group had influence on that, probably toward beneficial influence. And then they were wearing on the non-dominant wrist, and then they would wear it, and we would expect it to die toward the end of the day because we knew the battery wouldn't last that long. We got it to at least 11, I think up to 11 hours every day, but still it would die right before sleep. So they would remove it to charge it every night. Okay, don't worry about what this is. I'm just kind of showing that it's this data, to process it was really difficult. What I'm highlighting here is the pipeline we use to process the research grade devices. And that was much easier. But you can see down at the bottom, here's the timestamp of our internal document. That was a year ago. We got that pipeline done, but we're still working on Apple Watch because Apple Watch data is very difficult to work with. And I think we got it, but there was a lot of learning, a lot of manual procedures that we had to do and build and generate. Okay, so for aim 1, on time. Table 1, here are the participant characteristics. Remember I said there's 25 people, but I think for this presentation, I took out the person living with mild AD and focused on normal cognition and MCI. NC means normal cognition, MCI means mild cognitive impairment. 9 participants with MCI. And essentially, when you go across the rows, you see that, I think these are medians. Yeah, these are medians. But essentially, there's almost like a 5-year difference. Those with MCI are younger here. It's a small sample, so I use the medians just so it didn't get too skewed. But in a sense, they're younger. Both have pretty much the same percentage of females. I think there's something I want to say. Very high years of education. There is a difference between married and living alone, whereas those with normal cognition had higher percentage of being married, and then those with MCI had a higher percentage of actually living alone. I thought that was pretty interesting. I put not working here. The percentages are kind of close. You can argue MCI has a little bit higher percentage or prevalence of not working. Fair self-rated reporting fair self-rated health was higher among MCI. That means less than good or less than excellent. There was higher ADLs. I thought this was really interesting. If you go all the way down to arthritis, the second row from the bottom, 100% of those living with MCI reported arthritis or osteoarthritis, whereas 44% of the people with normal cognition didn't. And then depression and some of the vascular factors seemed in line in what you expect with differences between MCI and normal cognition. And then I just put a note here for missing. So those people with what we determine as missing valid data in the accelerometry tended to be younger men and reported needing assistance performing ADLs. Okay, so for this first aim, I just want to go through the flow. So we have 25 people. There were 2 people who were removed who had really long periods of non-movement outside of sleep time, but their sleep logs didn't say they took it off. So, but it looked really weird. So we took them out as outliers. And then they removed the device during sleep. So that affects kind of our diurnal patterning. So just for this analysis, we took them out. We do have them in a bigger data set. So this is what we call traditionally, based on the algorithms that are validated, valid actigraph data. 22 people have it. We took out the mild AD person. So we're left with 21. Among the 21, this is essentially the main results. Let's take a look at, so wear days, the top one is how many days they wore it and got enough accelerometry to count at that we believe, basically. If you wear it for 1 hour in that day, that's not indicative of your full day, is how we think about valid and non-valid wear days. The big differences are here. So total activity counts, like I was saying, is your amount. And there is almost a 200,000 count difference per day between normal cognition and MCI. So such that MCI has lower total activity counts. Now, how do we interpret that? That's the second line. That's almost an hour difference of activity, of any activity, not exercise, but any activity. It's almost an hour difference in the day. Okay. Sedentary time, interestingly, was somewhat similar, but then if we look at percent active while awake, you can see there is slight differences. The percentage while awake was a little bit lower among those with MCI. The mean active bout, this thing is a very interesting one. This is how contiguous your activity is when you're active. Having a 1 minute difference is actually pretty big. So when I'm active, all my active bouts tend to be either 4 minutes long or 3 minutes long, and that's pretty big a difference. Here's activity fragmentation. This is what I was talking about, how you break up your activity throughout the day. It's 28% among those with MCI versus 23% to us, and we're still working on this, but we really believe that 1% difference is a lot. And here we're seeing almost a 5% difference. That is really, really high. Now, we don't know the context of why it's high within that 1% difference, but that is very, very interesting result that we need to probe further. I will just say in some of the really, really large studies, when activity fragmentation is related to mortality, it's at a threshold of 30%. That's like kind of the magic number. 30%, it's like you are doing really bad in terms of physical functions and mortality, physical markers. Okay. And sedentary fragmentation tends to be somewhat similar, which is odd because usually when activity fragmentation goes up, sedentary fragmentation goes down. And like they work in inverse, but here they ended up the same. And there's a result in there that I need to look further, but I think this has something to do with differences in sleep. Okay, so this is the time of day data. I'll orient you to this. So on the y-axis is activity counts per minute. And on the x-axis is actually the minutes, right, in the day. So you take all the days, you average it, and you put in how much activity counts they got per minute, and then you can create this kind of diagonal curve. The green line being MCI, the blue line being normal, and then remember I said there was about a 60-minute difference in activity. We can see that that's really kind of occurring around here, 8 a.m. to about 2 p.m. So now we can identify the period in which it's occurring. Then you can see a little bit more difference here from, I think this is like 6 to 8 or something like that. But that's the usefulness of these types of time of day analyses here. Okay. We can also look at differences by weekday and weekend. And what I'm showing here are the accumulation of activity over the course of the day. So instead of reporting what your activity counts are that minute, I'm saying how much activity have you accrued across the minutes. So it should be going up. And it's a little bit hard to see here. I'm going to put a table here. But essentially, what you can look at is what day is most active and what day is least active, and look at the differences there. And what we see among those with normal cognition, Saturday is the most active, whereas for MCI, it's Wednesday. Now you might think, and I think Jen Schrack made this comment, well, are there working differences and things like that? And that's why I highlighted the not for work, a little bit like one person reported not working more so than the other group. It could be, but I don't know. It's something to think about, something to probe. And then, but I think it's interesting that there are these day-to-day differences on certain days. Here, when we go to the actual day and look at the diagonal curve, I thought it was really interesting that here on Monday, when you look at normal cognition being the solid line, MCI being the dotted line, you see a big discrepancy here. Big difference here on Monday within the morning to afternoon hours. But on Tuesday, yeah, there's a little bit of delay, but they're somewhat overlapping. Yeah, here Wednesday it's delayed, but they're somewhat overlapping, and Thursday they're really overlapping. But it was that Monday group that really was interesting. Small sample, of course, but if this is a true effect, I think worth something to note. Friday looks kind of similar. That's today that we're living in right now. Saturday, you start to see the weekend differences here in the morning between normal and MCI. There's a big spike here, and that's probably what's driving why Saturday was the most active for normal participants. And then normal cognition here on Sunday, you can see a difference within the Sunday day, more toward the afternoon. And I'm not sure what's causing this spike, but that requires more research. Okay. I think the weekday versus weekend count difference, we just boiled it down and categorized the weekend, weekday. You can see here, actually, what I'd like to do is actually go to this plot here. And I think this plot is very interesting. It's the accumulation. And it makes me wonder if this is some little novel metric that can be explored, because the y-axis is the same between the two graphs, right? This is the normal cognition graph. This is the MCI graph. You see that, look at the blue line. This is the weekday. The weekday looks almost similar as the same as the weekday here, right? But the red line is flipping between the two diagnosis groups, whereas the normal cognition is over and MCI is not. And if that's true and that's not explained by other confounders, I think that's a really interesting metric that can be explored and teased out in relation to cognition and in that route. Okay, so that was aim 1 in a nutshell. Aim 2 is then bringing the Apple Watch and seeing how well that's doing in relation to what we just found. The Apple Watch is a little more complicated. Oh, where's this line here? Okay, I put a weird animation. So instead of 21, we have further constriction of the sample because the data, some of the data was either insufficient, meaning that up to 1 hour sometimes wasn't ticked and we only got an hour, so we couldn't use that data, or there's pending processing. I thought we resolved this, but maybe we're still working on it. So we're left with 15 in our sample. Oh, but before that, I think this is a really interesting table, because what I'm showing here is among the 24 who were enrolled and underwent data collection, look at the percentages between having any actigraph data or any Apple data. They're very similar, right? There's a little bit of change here in normal cognition MCI between actigraph and Apple. So that to me is they wore it. It's more of a protocol difference. What we asked them to do to get the Apple Watch data, it's not that they weren't wearing it, right? They did what we asked them to do. And even then, 88% of the 24 had usable data, right? And it ranged from 78 to 89, depending on the status. And here with the Apple Watch data, because we're asking them every day to charge it and restart it, that means we get a log file of their data every day. In essence, we're asking for 10-day collection. Of the 10 days, we get around 6 to 7 days, which is really good. That's most valid wear algorithms only really require 3 days, and here we're getting 6 to 7. And it's essentially this log files per day should be 1. When it gets higher than 1, that means something messed up and they had to restart or something like that. It was nearly 1, but there are some instances where it wasn't. I want to go a little bit quicker. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to say there's a lot of stuff here. Basically, there are huge device differences in wear time. I'll point you to these two. Can you guys see my mouse, by the way? I'm sorry. Can you see my mouse? Okay, I see your head shake. Okay, so this is a big device difference here. 1440 means that's actually how many minutes are in a day, 1440. Of that, actigraph collected most of it, but Apple Watch data couldn't keep up. And that's kind of the point of this entire thing. We're just showing it in different ways. So the way we're asking people to wear it has an impact on how much data we can get. When we apply our very strict actigraph algorithms, the correlation between Apple Watch and actigraph data is really, really poor, as you can see on this side. Yeah, minutes spent active has a high correlation, but the numbers don't match. So you can correct it by a factor, possibly, through some fancy stats, but the numbers don't really match either. Here's the correlation where we said, okay, that's protocol differences, but when the Apple Watch is collecting and we take actigraph matched to when it's collecting, how good is the data? And all of a sudden, the correlations go skyrocket. And essentially what this is saying is when the Apple Watch is actually collecting data, it's doing it almost identically to the actigraph monitor. Okay. There are some key differences. This mean active bout got hit low. We have to probe this. I'm not exactly sure why this would go down like this, but we also should consider they're not quite over, like the watches are side by side. They're not on the same part of the body length. So that does have a not so small impact on data collection as well. Here are the diurnal curves. So essentially what we would want to see here, Apple Watch is on the right. What we want to see compared to actigraph on the left is Apple Watch performing the same way, and it's not having the same curves as it is. We've made a very large assumption that when they're not wearing it, they're getting zeros, but when it's active, it's pretty correlated. So the diurnal curves should occur correctly. We would just disregard kind of the sleep area part. But there are pretty large differences from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's basically the time they're, taking off the charger, doing all the log stuff and the protocol differences here. And this essentially is just saying that the differences, the correlations that we found are not really different between normal cognition and MCI that we found in the overall sample. Okay. We did put a post-study questionnaire. I just wanted to just briefly go through it because I kind of wish I had more of a qualitative scientist on my team because I didn't ask great questions. But I asked some more on the device, and now I'm kind of regretting it because there are other questions I wanted to ask. But was it uncomfortable to wear for 10 consecutive days? Most people said yes. There was a good proportion between a little uncomfortable to sort of uncomfortable, not very uncomfortable. But people got used to it. 88% got used to it. They got used to filling out the bedtime logs. There was some skin irritation wearing both. It was primarily from the Apple Watch, not the actigraph. So it's just an awkward position to wear another watch next to a watch. And there is some people that the devices made them feel restless, annoyed, and irritated. I don't know how we can interpret this, but over half did recommend, would recommend to their peers. I have this area in which they can just handwrite freeform to expand on this here. And most of it is like, I hate wearing two watches at once. It's just uncomfortable. I don't want to go out looking weird like that. One participant actually told us she would wear both watches and a Fitbit, and she had concerns on how she would look to her peers, but then she said no one really noticed, so I'm fine with it. And I think she said she would recommend it. That was kind of an interesting comment. So that's the post-study questionnaire. I know I went through this kind of fast. Oh, I'm sorry, but I'll put kind of the summary on what I think. So in the sample of older Black participants living with MCI appear to have lower total daily everyday movement, higher activity fragmentation, that means more interrupted activity, and delayed and diminished diurnal movement patterns when compared to the normal cognition counterparts. Now, I didn't run any stats because the sample's so small, but descriptively, that's what we're seeing. And based on what I know with the samples, they look pretty significant too, differences. I think of note, this time of day analysis, particularly finding these differences in the morning, is really interesting and might be very important towards cognition and cognition finding, because a lot of times when we're looking at physical activity in relation to physical outcomes, frailty, fatigue, things of that nature, these time of day differences are in the afternoon, not in the morning. And here we're finding differences in the morning. And I think that's a very interesting finding to probe. In my view, measuring physical activity appears feasible among our participants, regardless of cognitive status. One of the collaborators on the study, Lauren Parker, I don't know if she's a RCMAR scientist, but she and Cheney, I don't know if Cheney's on the call. I know she's in our cohort, but we're all like Butler Williams scholars. And Lauren Parker really helped me design this study. And we were talking about the results before she went maternity leave. I mean, I think that this really does show we can measure physical activity no matter what cognitive status there is. So it's really compelling. The problem is the Apple Watch is not very good at collecting quality data. That's the issue. And that really, it's far behind the actigraph, and there needs to be more development there. It's 51. I really want to leave time for questions. I just want to say where we're going with this, or what I'm thinking about with this. And I think this leads to community-based participatory research in two realms. It's kind of understanding what these differences are and how and whether this stuff resonates with the community here. If it doesn't resonate, none of this matters. So we need to first figure that out. And then if it does, I think these can be intervenable targets. We can work backwards. We can intervene on something, the idea of activity fragmentation, but we need to talk to each other and work through what that actually means. And then also, it really shows that for commercial grade devices, we need more and more better hardware and software development for that. And I think this can link towards entrepreneurship and building of these things if there's interest within the Black community, and linking that together with evidence-based science. So I think there's a real big opportunity for that here. Okay, I'll end here. There's a bunch of collaborators here. I do want to highlight in blue the research coordinators who did a ton of work to get this data ready, very last minute, especially Francesca, who just gave me a lot of this kind of last minute, but thank you so much.
That's great. Really, really great work. But we had a couple of things that came up in the chat. I don't know if you want to stop sharing the screen, but
let me stop.
You know, particularly Betsy Simon made some what I thought were really good points, and I'm hoping she'll speak.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah, if you can unmute, let's talk. Is she still here?
You there, or did I embarrass you and you didn't want
I can read the comment. Let's see. Older adults and others are encouraged to get physical activity in many ways, including blocks of 10 minutes. So are you recommending a message change? And regarding safety streets are in need of repair to reach more underserved older adults? Do you wish your grant could have provided all devices needed? I'll talk to your second point on providing a device. I really wanted to give these away. I couldn't, unfortunately, because we need to keep measuring.
Okay.
But that is a goal.
Unmuted.
Like I just want, I do eventually just, here, take it. It's yours.
I'm
And
unmuted. I can speak now.
Hi.
I'm never embarrassed to talk.
Okay,
But,
good.
I'm glad you're responding to the items in the chat. But as you continued your presentations, it was a couple of things that I just feel might help. And that is, I think many of the questions or concerns you had about peaks, et cetera, might be cultural related. For an example, on Wednesdays and Sundays, that's church. And depending on the denomination, there's a lot of movement in church, standing, sitting, shouting, moving around, going to the mall after church, walking the mall, having dinner.
Yeah.
And so it's certain things that are just a part of the culture and how people interact. So I know that your study probably doesn't allow to have the range of collegiate support that you want, but maybe if just having conversations with older adults, Black older adults who are not in the study, just to see, you know, what is your day like, or what happens, you know, usually. And also, I just wanted to mention that you mentioned at the end that there was a high rate of people suggesting they would recommend it to others. And as a researcher, based on my experience, older adults, especially Black older adults, are very protective of young professionals. And so they realize that this is a part of your work. And sometimes they are protective and may give positive responses to things like, would you recommend it to someone else? So I just wanted to throw those things out along with the other issues mentioned, that devices might be a barrier for many. And so to be more inclusive, I asked, would it have helped you if you were able to provide the devices?
Yeah. That's a goal. I couldn't this time around, but I wanted to. The best I could do was give gift cards. And that is the goal of giving the devices, because they are expensive.
How much was
For your oh, sorry.
How much was the gift card?
Gift card ended up being $50.
For the whole study, huh?
Yeah, for the whole study, 10-day collection.
Yeah.
It's not much. And I agree with you there. For your comments about what happens during Wednesdays and Sundays, thank you. I did not know that. And this is why I present and garner feedback. And I'm hoping to, when we take this further, to build in that component. That is a very necessary component to understand the reasoning why what I'm seeing is going on and explaining it. You know, we often talk about the mixed methods, and that's kind of where I want to take it there. And then for the high rates of protecting young professionals, I didn't actually understand that comment in this. Are you just saying they're just saying yes to help me out?
It's sort of like when you do the surveys after you've been on Amazon. If the person was really, really nice in all areas, you know, and you feel this will help the most. So it's not a bad thing. It probably speaks to your interactions. And this is my opinion. I of course, I work with older adults every week, 5 to 6 hours, and sort of, you know, hear what they're saying. But I don't know where your study was done, what area I got on lay of the country.
Yeah. Oh,
we're going to have to end soon. I don't know if there's, those were good comments. I just wonder if there's one other, I thought
Thank you, Betsy. Yes.
Yeah, I can.
Hi, Kyle.
I can ask a question. Hi, Amal. Yeah, great presentation. One of the questions Betsy actually asked in the chat that was kind of made me think of, do you have a sense of whether participants are coming from similar like living environments in terms of like neighborhood resources, neighborhood walkability, and oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's frozen.
You can't, you did come up.
Oh, I think I froze.
Can you hear us? I'm going to address Kyle's question right now.
Go ahead.
I think most people were within a 5-mile radius of the Baltimore campus. We did not really assess neighborhood walkability. You can only throw so much into the study. We did do a lot more with the individual capability rather than environmental factors, but we do need to explore that area.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now? I think I froze for a minute there.
Yeah, Kyle, I did answer.
Yeah.
We heard your question. I did answer it just for the sake of time, but
awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but the environmental factors are key. I focus more on the individual type level questions rather than environmental build, but we do need that, especially if we're going to think about intervening as well, and if intervening is an important issue.
Well, that was really great. We should stop because we're at 2:00. And I'm sure if there are questions for you, people will send them to you, Amal.
Yes. I'll put my email in the chat just if people want to. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Such much hard work. Thank you.